In my reflections today, I want to consider two main questions. Firstly, why do some places work, and for whom do they work? As an urban historian, I want to know why there are certain continuities within a city, the durable elements of cities. And secondly, in building on this, what is the relationship between the sensory environment we've heard about today and a concept called place attachment, a word we've also heard a lot today. So my reflections are going to focus on everyday urban users and try to understand how their senses inform their lived experiences and degrees of attachments to places. So put very bluntly, the senses, to me, are important as they can help to reveal why certain places matter to certain people at certain times, or rather, how and why they are suffused with meanings and memories. So I follow Chris Johnson's seminal work from Australia here, and I would suggest that the sensorial experiences, the primary experiences of place are important, but only because they give us an insight into a more reflective process, which is about place attachment. So why some places work, and then also the converse, why they don't, why attachments develop or they don't, is inherently subjective, and it depends on a number of different factors. Some are individually based, others culturally constructed, and some mediated through planning laws, codes, and regulations. But here I want to focus on durable spaces, i.e. the spaces within cities that are well used by a range of different people at different times of the day and which matter to them. Common to these spaces is that there is a relationship between people and place. This can be fleeting, it can be based on dependency, the route that you take to work, the place your office is located, where you live. It can also be related or reliant on amenity, the things you perceive yourself to want, need, or desire. There's an awful lot of work in urban design around this, and I'm going to use three seminal works here to try and elaborate just a little bit of context. So in terms of the everyday nature of places, then Kevin Lynch would focus on the legibility of the city, the paths, the nodes, the edges, the landmarks, and the districts we use to orient ourselves. However, I would argue the relationships can also be based on emotional reactions to certain places. Places of joy, happiness, sadness, places that can cause panic, anger, fear, and anxiety. Places we repeatedly want to visit and to use, and places we avoid if possible. Jane Jacobs related this to the street, the spaces of interaction and engagement. And finally, William H. White, in his work on life in public spaces, instead focused on the intricate patterns of use within a public square, where people sit to have lunch, where people meet to talk, and the wonderful sequence where he shows the number of people who feel the need to physically move a chair just an inch or half an inch before they sit down. Some sense of ownership about their experience, their touch, their sense of place in those squares. And as I said, some of these relationships are fleeting, and I acknowledge that, and some are durable, but all involve sensorial experiences. And my reflections today focus on emotional attachments to these durable places. And it's often only when we're forced to confront why places work. Often we are only forced to confront why places work and the degree of attachment towards them when there is some threat of change, for example, during the process of redevelopment, as people's emotional responses to place erupt in a cacophony of noise expressed through public meetings and sound bites coined through social media. So I want to use this idea of change and how it can help us to understand the kinds of sensory experiences that take place within urban space and how these inform attachment to the said durable places. And I'm going to take a particularly contentious example, one that, being in London, you're probably all fairly familiar with. I'm going to use the example of the South Bank Undercroft, a project that has consistently challenged me over the course of the 3 years that I've worked on it. And I undertook a number of different methods that are highlighted in Astrid's opening talk. We used walking interviews, oral histories, filmmaking, film watching, observation, and documentary analysis. Quite frankly, it was exhausting, emotionally as much as physically. So the space, it's pretty grotty, I would suggest, to look at. It was a leftover space. But as a visitor to that site, I'm sure many of you will have walked down the South Bank. It's deeply sensorial. You walk down the bank, you stop maybe to watch the skaters, and in doing so, you lean on the handrail. You hear the distinctive clicks of the skateboard wheels and smell the pungent and somewhat gritty urban smells of this dark, enclosed space. But to the skaters, their cumulative, repeated rhythms and sensorial experiences inside the Undercroft were central to their profound attachment to place. I don't want to go into the campaign they won if you can win in such circumstances. But very quickly, the South Bank Centre needed to redevelop their space. Therefore, you would lose the undercroft. They offered a replacement site, which was vehemently refused. And in the end, this space, the existing undercroft, has been retained. And as an academic, I wanted to know why the new space was rejected and why this existing space was so special. So here, during the course of this project, the two things coincided. I started to think a little bit more about sensorial reactions and how these ingrained profound attachments across the generations of skaters. So I want to focus on two particular senses: sound and sight. A rich sensory environment was evoked by the skaters' recollections of the undercroft. The most dominant sense was sound. A number of skaters, both young and old, talked about the noise that comes with these kinds of places, the way noise reverberates around in the enclosed space with that low ceiling. The unique feeling of skating the undercroft was developed by the aural environment, as one of the contemporary generation believed, and you can see here, people can tell you exactly the way it sounds, but nowhere sounds quite like the South Bank. And what's important to note when I take out these quotes is these were not momentary or fleeting recollections, they were repeated throughout the interviews, but rather deeply held visceral reactions to a space that were embedded in the memory, both mind and body. You can see this, the muscle memory quote on the board here, of the skaters. And the immersive responses to the undercroft conveyed a rich and textured engagement with the space that went crucially beyond a casual interaction to ensure that the space became, as the quote suggests, like an imprint on my psyche. It became very special to me and anyone who's ever skated here. And I think that gives us some sense of the embodied nature of attachment. But this attachment didn't just exist in nostalgic memories, but rather was deeply ingrained with the sensorial experience of the continually challenging space. Crucially, the skaters weren't campaigning to just preserve the space or the ability to skate, but rather the very special sensorial experiences that were fostered within the undercroft. That to them was sacred. Sound was also used as a tool to delegitimate or illegitimate the claim to the new space. One of the skaters said there was a fundamental flaw in the design of the new space. It was the noise factor of the high volume of trains. Apparently being able to hear skaters is a really important part of conducting your practice. So the skaters felt that it was impossible for them to recreate the feel, the sound, the sensory experiences and the atmosphere of the undercroft in the new skate park. So finally, I want to finish on a point, which I think is a broader methodological point, about how on earth you communicate all of this. Systems are not set up in terms of planning and heritage to capture all of this information. I'm going to highlight a few challenges with that at the end. So highlighting the experiential nature of the undercroft was a tactic used by the campaign team to convey the significance of the space. And it brings me back to methods, as I said. How do we convey these sensorial experiences if they're deeply personalized and embodied within a particular space and time? So the campaigners decided that the way that they would do this was to use film. They produced an awful lot of YouTube films throughout the campaign. One of them that's on the slide here is the infamous, or they will call it famous, Dear Jude film, which was addressed to Jude Kelly, the artistic director of the South Bank Centre. Quite cheekily, I would have thought. Had a lot of bravery to do this. And it contained the printed words, "Open your eyes," overlaid over the image of moving skaters. And this is where the visual becomes dominant. And the film was designed to convey that we don't need words. We don't even need to say anything. Just go look at it. Take a moment to see the beauty of what this place is. That transcends any language. So in a sense, it was a plea for both Jude, but other people as well, general public, to just go and try and invest in that kind of visitor sensorial experience that attracted a number of people to stand and watch the side of the undercroft. So over time, these sensorial and embodied reactions to the undercroft became a crucial element of the campaign, but not one that was immediately obvious or easily accessible through desk-based research. Which brings me on to my final concluding points. This is the bit where I get pessimistic and I talk about all the challenges and the issues. So considering the senses as one element of what makes a place work seems to be axiomatic. Yet in reality, it throws up many challenges. The skaters had no legal right to that site. They were there through association and continuity of usage. It throws up challenges in terms of what we as academics can do and thinking about how you might mediate this in future conflicts. Is it even possible to conduct a rapid assessment of these complex sensorial environments without being overly reductionist and in doing so reducing the very spirit and essence of the things that they were campaigning for? To give an example, it took us over 2 years. We used 6 different methods and we did in-depth interviews with 25 people to access just some of this. And so it's obvious that the methods that academics use do not chime with the timescales of development and the ever-increasing demand for quicker turnaround time in processing planning applications. A further crucial point that arose throughout the project is the inherent subjectivity of sensory reactions to and experiences of urban places. Whose sensory experiences should be privileged when deciding the future of place? The stark example for the Undercroft is how the noise of the skaters' wheels clashes with the sound of the symphony inside the building to which that was its original purpose. Further question, should this be about existing users, or future users, or groups of users, and who on earth should decide this? I've got another point as well. How do you reconcile this with private property rights, legal systems, economic concerns, environmental sustainability? We could go on and on and on. And finally, this is my final point, I promise, I want to ask if it's even possible or even desirable to reduce this complex sensorial environment I've given you just a flavour of to the rational language that I think is demanded within the current planning system and structures. And these questions, I would suggest, cannot be answered from only inside the academic echo chamber. We only know so much, and it's through conflict and challenge with practitioners and different stakeholders that I think we can start to underline some of the key issues in trying to understand how you take sensory information and think about it in the replanning and the redevelopment of certain urban spaces. That I'll finish with.